it's time for an interesting conversation on brands and the trends that follow. The session will start with a presentation on brands in motion by Nitin Mantri, Group CEO, AvianWE. After his presentation, he will be joined on stage by Nyrika Holkar, Executive Director of Godrej and Boyce. Nyrika is a businesswoman, philanthropist, and member of the Bar Association of India.
Welcome to the launch of the 2022 iteration of WE Communications Brand in Motion study, which we've called the Bravery Mandate, Make It Real. In the next 10 minutes or so, I will take you through the top-line insights and general population data from the India and global white papers, which are available for download also on the AvianWE and WE websites. Each year, we leverage this data to inform our approach to communication strategy and to counsel our clients. So to begin with, just a short message from our global CEO and founder, Melissa.
It's been a challenging few years, and it's not letting up. I'm certainly learning every day how best to move our business to adapt and thrive. One big learning in 2022, backed by our research, is about what consumers are craving from us as business leaders. We're being called upon to step up and do the right thing, regardless of the consequences, keeping in mind that how we get there needs to be immediate and can't leave anyone or any community behind. And this is the humanity that we're all being called upon, always, to keep front and center in our leadership. And just as importantly, our customers and our employees, they want to be with us every step of the way. And that pressure to do that is building. They want to see proof of our work. They want us to make our convictions and our goals real, and they must be brought along on our journey. As we all know, consumers are already telling us that if we do the right thing, they will stay with us. And we need to share openly and specifically how we've done against those goals. What can each person in our organization do for their part? Always again being mindful of our impact on others and our communities around the globe. People are not asking that companies take on every problem, but they do want us to really own our chosen cause and to be very clear about what we stand for. We're not in business to please every single person on this planet. We're in it to focus on fulfilling a need and bringing our team along always. People want progress, but they don't expect perfection. They expect us to be in it for the long haul, and they know we'll stumble and we'll learn along the way. And I think that the companies that are brave enough to answer this mandate, to make it real and invite our stakeholders along this journey will earn their respect and keep the customers and partners with whom they deal with every day alongside them. We don't need to be superheroes, we just need to make it real.
Great. So, moving on, the survey this year resulted in 4 key insights for brands, each of which we'll discuss in detail. The first is that practicality takes precedence, meaning that while people want brands to have long-term ambitions for tomorrow, these must be balanced with short-term action plans that adapt to the realities of today. Next is the expectation that brands will show their work. In other words, that they will be transparent on the processes they put in place to achieve purpose-led goals. Third is the continued expectation that action will start from the top, with CEOs and senior executives expected to lead their teams by example and set the tone for transparency. And finally, the imperative for brands to lean into the S in ESG, which stems from the data showing that environmental commitments are increasingly table stakes, and brands must show the people-first holistic impact they're making and ensure that no one is left behind. Now let's delve a little deeper into the data behind these core insights in more detail. First, let's start with the first insight: practicality takes precedence. This is a reflection of our times, tough economic times. It's an interesting duopoly that there is still a desire from consumers to actually lean into the long-term ambitions which they've set themselves, but they also want brands to support on many of the real pressures that people are facing today. Consistent from last year, respondents want brands to stay the course on the macro North Star type issues. So about 60% of India respondents, globally the number was actually 70%, said that they prefer that companies focus their multi-year investments on a single cause rather than a different issue every year. We asked people where companies need to specifically step up their efforts, and this is what they said. People expect brands to adapt to the realities of the day, and the biggest reality post-pandemic is access to healthcare. So it's no surprise that people feel that there is a critical area brands should take more responsibility for and accelerate their efforts, both internally and externally. Education is also very important for Indian consumers. Globally, however, the cost of living index, or the cost of living per se, is the number one where brands must accelerate their efforts on behalf of both customers and employees. So there's a little change between the India numbers and the global numbers. Quick example of a company that is supporting its people. Virgin Atlantic is working to ensure their employees' mental wellness by training more than 400 volunteer team members in a 2-day mental wellness first aid course. We heard a lot about mental wellness earlier in the day as well today, and its importance in corporate. The volunteers learn to spot early warning signs of mental distress and direct their co-workers to relevant support. The program was started by Virgin Atlantic Senior Manager Crew Experience, a gentleman called Steve Sneddon, who was brave enough to be open about his own experience with panic attacks and anxiety. The focus on practicality is, however, not a call for brands to abandon their ambitious plans. Nearly all respondents said they want companies to have high-reaching goals. The distinction is that people say the effort devoted to these initiatives, think gender bias, climate change, etc., should lean more heavily towards the practical, 55%, versus the ambitious, 45%. The percentage for practical goals was 59% globally versus the ambitious, which was actually 41%. Based on our first insight, this is what we recommend. Define your practical goals to build and over time. Don't try to tackle every issue. Still pick up on real-time issues where relevant. By having a strong foundation of staying the course, you will have credibility to be flexible. And finally, think about holistic support. Donations, fundraising, employee compensation are at the core, but supporting well-being or education with programs, talent resources, and more are also expected. Insight 2. While Insight 1 was about the issues to focus on and where to invest your money, Insight 2 is all about how do we communicate and how you're doing that. It focuses on ramping up as much possible the transparency of your journey. So sitting behind this expectation is the fact that businesses and brands are increasingly seen as the most important institutions for driving change and creating societal stability. The numbers saw a sharp rise over the last few years, and now it has stabilized to sit squarely next to media and government, as you can see from the data over here. Yet, despite brands being seen as an important part of society, about half of the people, 48% to be exact, don't believe brands are delivering on these goals. They either doubt or don't feel they can see the role brands are playing in society. It's a classic case of not being able to see the actual results. How can brands actually overcome this skepticism? 71% of Indian consumers, respondents, want brands to be transparent in their communication with the public and how they're responding to current and emerging issues in society. The figure was at par with the global number, which was at 74%. People expect brands to be candid about where they're falling short. They want to know why and how brands are shifting approach to address these shortcomings. To give you more tangible guidance as possible, we ask people why they're skeptical about brands achieving their goals. For Indian respondents, the number one reason is brand announcement without specific budgets or resources. So if you don't have specific budgets or resources, don't do an announcement. Globally, lack of data is the number one reason for consumer skepticism. Lack of data featured at number 4 in India. Number 3 is around the issue of brands not setting specific time frames. So if you're saying you're going to be carbon neutral, then you have to give a timeline, for example, like Microsoft did for 2030. All these factors ladder up to the notion that brands must be proof and data-driven for people to believe they're legitimately achieving those goals. So our recommendations on Insight 2, make your purpose-driven goals smart by sharing details on what the specific outcomes will be and how do you measure that over a specific time frame. Lift the lid on your process. Communicate which partnerships, employee involvement, leadership appointments, protocols you're going to be doing during those goals. And finally, be bravely transparent about your progress. The third insight is about executive comms. How leaders should be communicating around these issues and some of the channels they should be using. These findings show that CEOs and other C-suite executives have an opportunity to actually lead by example by keeping stakeholders in the loop. We ask people to rank actions CEOs should take to prove they will deliver on their commitments by a significant margin people called transparency. Consumers want the CEO to be the face of that transparency. They want them to also bring in external objective experts to verify those achievements. Over half of the respondents want CEOs to put themselves out there to answer public questions about their progress towards commitments at regular intervals. By telling stories of how their work is helping and providing the tangible human impacts of their efforts, brands can show how effective their work actually is. These stories need not be told only on social. There is still very much a role for our media relations and more traditional channels in your purpose comms approach. The top ways brands are expected to communicate publicly with especially older cohorts are press releases and media statements, television media interviews, and public Q&A sessions, and more social or two-way channels for younger cohorts. Based on these findings, our recommendations would be set the tone of transparency through your leaders, your CEOs, or your larger CXO team, empower leaders to create a personal connection, and finally, ensure purpose comms is actually omni-channel. Finally, the fourth insight. Where in the ESG framework should brands focus their effort? Last year, we had a section that was called Starts at Home, and this is in the same vein. We are still asking brands to lean into the social categories of ESG, but in a way that has a holistic impact for employees, local communities, and consumers. As you can see, it's not about only offering employees benefit to your staff, but also going a step beyond to help communities with local issues that are important to them. The 2022 data also reinforces the fact that it's not just about climate change metrics, it's about climate justice too, making sure that the efforts that organizations make to invest in projects has a flow-on effect to help people by protecting jobs and livelihoods. This is where you can see that it's not about the S over E, but thinking about the intersection between the two, between the S and the E. So recommendations based on the fourth insight, broadly, identify areas to engage a local community, address universal social issues for women, LGBTQ, to name a few. Similarly, identify where brands can have an authentic point of view on human rights violations, and explore, finally, the intersection of E and S. At this stage, quick case study on McDonald's. We have a heartwarming case study of how brand reiterated its commitment to inclusivity by introducing an innovative packaging solution for patrons.
दरवाजे पर देकर दस्तक छोटे छोटे कुछ पल आए इनको ना छोड़ना हाथों को खोलना डिब्बे में देखो एक हंसी मिली डिब्बे में देखो एक हंसी मिली हाथों ने खुशियाँ चखी हाथों ने खुशियाँ चखी हाथों ने खुशियाँ चखी हाथों ने खुशियाँ चखी
So, just to wrap up, the demands of these times can feel overwhelming. To make it real, advice is do what you do best. Set realistic goals and issue frequent progress reports that take people on their journey. You don't have to solve or speak on every issue, but you can speak out on the issues you feel strongly about. And more importantly, tell the stories on how your work is actually helping. I'm going to end with a case study on Godrej and Boyce that has always been at the forefront of driving actions to curb climate change. The company has been preserving Vikhroli mangroves, the largest privately owned mangroves forests in the country. These mangroves are actually India's first ISO 14001 certified forest. To ensure dedicated focus, Godrej and Boyce has established a dedicated wetlands management services within the organization, which has been undertaking several conservation and renewal initiatives across the country in collaboration with local communities, especially those living in coastal states. Further, in 2020, the company jointly launched a campaign, Magical Mangroves, with WWF India to spread awareness about mangroves in 9 coastal states of India. The campaign has trained more than 150 young nature enthusiasts. These volunteers, or mangrove ambassadors as they're called, have sensitized more than 18,000 Indians through virtual sessions. I do give a lot of the credit of the green lung to Godrej and Boyce, and I think people in Bombay should know more than I do. And that gives me the leeway to invite Nyrika Holkar, Executive Director of Godrej and Boyce, on stage. Nyrika heads digital strategy, brand, legal, and M&A of the company and its subsidiaries. As chairperson of Godrej and Boyce's CSR committee, Nyrika is actively involved in the company's community development efforts, including education, skilling, and the preservation and protection of Mumbai's mangroves. Nyrika, please. Nyrika, welcome. Firstly, thank you so much for being here. I know to get you here all the way is in a busy schedule is always tough, but thank you so much. And I think a lot of us comms professionals will benefit from this conversation. So let me begin with a few questions. Our study here revealed that people are skeptical of brands in fulfilling their commitments, and brands, ardent supporters, are really demanding that brands show their work. What else can brands do to kind of win this kind of customer confidence?
Yeah. So I think that at least today, what we've been noticing, and maybe it's a little bit at odds, or maybe it needs to be desegregated from the global data, and whether it's customer-facing or B2B. But at least what we've found in our interactions with customers is that environmental considerations and purely environmentally conscious decisions are not going to kind of sway people to buy a product. So I think it's very important and maybe it's also part of the responsibility of brands to really be doing much more on shaping preferences and trying to work in a larger ecosystem. I think maybe earlier brands could work in their own ecosystem to create products and services, but today I think you have to work with a larger ecosystem, and people have to be, I think institutional customers, investors are much more attuned and look for that in brands. I think maybe less so in India on the retail side. But it's still, I think because it's still at a nascent stage in India, it's a responsibility of brands to really be doing more on the shaping of preferences perspective.
Okay, that's interesting. So there is a clear difference between how global consumers will look at brands compared to what Indian consumers would. So how important, therefore, is for organizations to be transparent with consumers and clearly articulate sustainability goals and the impact it might cause? So that's the education part. So is it critically important?
I think it's important. I think it's changed a lot from, say, a few years ago, where maybe it wasn't as important as top of the agenda. I think because of the climate crisis and everything happening today, I think it's become more imperative, and I think brands have got better at doing it. And as I mentioned earlier, I think from an institutional investor side, it's much more important. But I don't know on the retail customer side whether, for instance, if you had to choose between two brands, whether customers would really say, you know, I would buy a P&G product over a Unilever product because of their commitment to sustainability. And therefore, maybe it would be harder to make the case for a consumer. But I think on the institutional side, it's extremely important. And investors today are looking for clarity, and they're looking for outcomes. And they're looking for companies increasingly to take more responsibility.
On that, you'll be surprised, metros, I will not go to tier 2, tier 3 towns, but metros, our study said 68% of consumers retail consumers would consider choosing a brand with sustainability, clear sustainable goals versus brands that do not communicate clearly goals. So I know it's a small subsection of only metros in India, which is not the big chunk of the market, but it's a start.
And it presents a huge opportunity.
It presents a huge opportunity.
Because I think we are at the nascent stage, so it's really an opportunity for us to be doing more and for building that awareness. Just to give you an example of appliances, for instance, we have, we are trying to promote 4-star, 5-star air conditioners. But today, price becomes a barrier. And price is the first consideration when making a choice. Of course, features and price. But I think it's very important for us today to work with, government institutions, as can be seen from, say, the example of LED adoption in India, which today is at 90%, because government intervention, you had bulk procurement, and you were making prices more accessible. So I think that's one aspect. And then the second aspect, I think, is on the whole communication front. What more can we do to simplify? What more can we do to really make the idea of total cost of ownership something tangible? And how do we look at communicating to the customer the importance of, say, an appliance that doesn't consume as much energy for the life of the appliance, so your utility bills would be less. And therefore, on balance, it would make sense. But I think that is a journey, and I think we have to do much, much more than we're doing today to really make it more accessible.
I totally agree. I think we're such a price-sensitive market, and as a growing and evolving economy, that will always come across as a challenge. But you mentioned appliances, and I think that takes me to my next question. Tell us how Godrej and Boyce is integrating purpose into its business strategy, and what are the key issues that you are aiming to address in the Indian market through that?
Yeah, so our purpose is pioneer progress for generations. And I think it's a purpose that is a North Star that helps us to really move forward, but move forward for good and move forward to be relevant. And I think that, being a 125-year-old company, in some ways a legacy company, how do we remain relevant today? And how do we use this purpose to really integrate into business strategy, into the culture of the organization, so that it becomes authentic and it becomes a part of, it gets integrated in the DNA. And I think that's very important, it's very powerful, and I think it's extremely important from a culture perspective, because that's what drives people.
It reminds me of an old story, which president was it? I think it was President Kennedy. When visiting NASA, asked one of the janitors, "What's your job?" And he said, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." So the mission was man on the moon, and right to a janitor to the CEO was working towards putting a man on the moon. It doesn't matter whether you're a janitor or the CEO. You're right. So I think it has to be in the culture and DNA of the firm, and I think you guys are doing a great job in pushing that piece. I talked about the mangroves case study briefly. We are aware that you've been a leader in mangrove conservation, and I mean, just for this audience, tell us for many decades, what is the significance of protecting the mangroves and the biodiversity? What was the thinking behind it?
So mangroves has always been very sacred to the family, and all the work that the trusts have done to protect. And I think today, as we reflect on the efforts done by my grandfather, great-grandfather, granduncle, I think today the relevance is probably more so than it was then. And because of the climate disasters, especially for a city like Bombay, which has such a large coastline, and with so many weather disruptions and so much instability and uncertainty caused due to weather issues, it's really helped for business continuity. It's helped in terms of creating a green lung for the city that is now even more polluted than Delhi. And it's also, there are a lot of ecosystem services that the mangroves provides that today people don't really know about. I mean, one aspect would be prevention of soil erosion. Another would be the fact that actually mangroves are nearly 4 times better at scrubbing carbon than a terrestrial forest, which would not be widely known. And its assistance in terms of flooding and providing livelihood for fishermen, biodiversity. So we thought it was important today to do an ecosystem study, which we've now initiated, in terms of valuing ecosystems, because I think if you can't put a financial number on something, it's not valued in the same way. And if you can, I think the importance and relevance becomes even more pronounced.
True.
And I think it's very important. I think also at COP27, one of the main issues was mangroves, and I think that's great. I think India's joined the Mangrove Alliance.
It was, yes, on COP27, mangroves were discussed.
Yeah. So I think that these are all very positive steps. There's a lot of initiative by the government to do more, to recognize, and I think we have to do more, to spread awareness, to create coalitions, to also work beyond the ambit of just where we are today. I think it's important to look pan-India, it's important to look globally, and to extend that network wider.
And the study going to come out soon with the value?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, look forward to that. Yeah. So apart from the mangroves, what have been the other key ESG initiatives that the company has undertaken? If you want to just highlight a few more.
Sure. So in terms of ESG, I would broadly, there's a whole slew of activities, but broadly would bucket them into operations and process. So we have targets for carbon reduction, for also kind of reducing carbon intensity. So those are sort of 2030 targets for all the businesses. And then on the other side, there's the whole good and green products. So good products are basically products which address needs of bottom of the pyramid, low-income homes, and how do we make products more accessible to them. And the other aspect is on green products, which is sustainable products, sustainably sourced wood, for instance, for interior, and our furniture business. So I would broadly bucket them in those two categories. And then, of course, in terms of community development, we have factories across India, so a lot of focus is given on women empowerment, on skilling, on education, sanitization. So I think those are very important. CSR, so it's only 2%, but I think it's very important to integrate and look holistically, not just have financial parameters and sustainability parameters, but look more closely at how they can be integrated and have hybrid metrics. where you're actually looking holistically at both performance and sustainability together.
That's interesting, hybrid metrics. And actually, the quick question on that actually. So as a business leader, you have a responsibility towards your consumers as well as to business growth, right? So how do you ensure that balance between sustainability and profit, or people and profit? Or should I say purpose versus profit? And that's a question a lot of people keep asking.
I think, it's a tough question.
It is.
I think you have to have some amount of patient capital. I think
Patient capital. Okay, fair enough.
I think giving, for an example of something that we're working on, recycled concrete, for instance, is an innovation that our construction team came up with. Today, it's not in the building codes. So all infrastructure construction projects happen with and have to adhere to the building code. Today, because recycled concrete is not actually part of the building code, it's actually illegal to use it.
Really?
Well, in the sense that it's not
commonly used. Yes, fair enough.
So you have to then look at, and we were able to actually use these recycled pavers just for the wall of the metro project, also for the coastal road. So I think those are two now case studies in a way for the durability, because people generally think if it's recycled, it's not as strong, or if it's recycled, it may not have the integrity of virgin material. So today, I think being able to, if you say, is that business profitable? The answer is no. Could it be profitable? Yes. Do you need to be patient to make that happen? Yes. So maybe you take a few bets and try to focus on them. But yes, it takes time, and it takes a lot of coordination with government. It takes a lot of consumer awareness, education. So it's not immediate. And I think that may be the difference. What is your appetite for waiting, and how fast can you do it?
Yeah, I guess. And how quickly can you convince external audiences to accept it? Like you said, is integrity of the material, people may have a different view about it, and it takes time for them to also, I guess, get used to the idea that it's as good as virgin material. We have a few minutes. If anybody has a question, I'll come back to you for a couple of questions, so keep it ready. One of the things that came out of our study was that purpose has to start from the top, and I know that at Godrej and Boyce, Mr. Godrej himself has been, at the forefront of communicating the ESG strategy. Tell me how, and I guess for Godrej and Boyce it's been easier because like you said, your grandfather and your forefathers, the group has been doing it for so many years. How do you see in our industry in general, do you think CEOs are actually taking that lead now? Is that awareness there for them to take the lead, not on just ESG, but on generally on purpose?
I think definitely. I think there's a marked difference from even 5-6 years ago. I think it's very much top of mind, and I think it's and you can see it across the board. I think I think it does matter, and I think today also businesses are aware that they probably won't get funding if they don't. So it's also a necessity, but I think people have adopted it much more, and I think it's important. I think without Mr. Godrej's direction and guidance, it may not always be top of the agenda. And so I think that's very important.
It has to flow from the top. It's helped, that flying from the top.
It has.
Great. Any questions? One question over there. Is there a mic? You want to shout?
Thank you so much. It's a privilege today to be in front of you. I'm Pooja Singh.
Hi.
So even I belong from a corporate, not as big as Godrej, but always there has been, all companies are doing their bit to achieve the best that they can right now. So from a communications, being a communications professional, I want to understand how important is it for a corporate as big as you or as small as you to communicate? Is there an acceptance? Because usually what happens is, numbers, it's a number game, right? So, okay, today my company has done X, Y, Z, planted so many trees, so the news will get covered. Otherwise, it may not get covered. Some corporates believe that probably will not say at all because we are a legacy company. We do not want to communicate is because that will be shown as, that they are trying to gain mileage out of the corporate, out of the good work that they are doing. So do you believe that one, without keeping all these things aside, one should actually go ahead and communicate, go out, all out there, go communicate to the people what they are doing, or one should actually just stay and say, no, let us do the good work first and then communicate?
Yeah, so great question. I think that, I think today, and giving the example of Godrej and Boyce, has historically been a company that didn't communicate. Always believed that, let our actions speak for themselves. We don't, and that should be enough. I think today in this social media world of information at your fingertips, fake news, where people don't really know the difference between what is real, what is not, and it's a question of sifting through information. I think it's very important, more important maybe than it was in the past, to communicate often, to communicate consistently, and to communicate in a creative way that is engaging. But I think today it's not an option. I think, and I think we, in a way, kind of paid the price for also being silent, because that makes the space for others to interpret, to fill the space. And I think that can be quite damaging today.
Any other quick questions? Well, I have one more. Okay, one question at the back. We take one more and then...
Saisha here again, representing the practice. There was a question on profit versus purpose, which you did, talk about from the perspective of an established brand, right? And for established brands, it could be easier to have a purpose, stick to it, as you mentioned, probably park patience, capital. But, my question is for the emerging brands, perhaps startups, which are struggling to get their hands on risk capital, might not have patience capital to park. And maybe just solving one market problem, one topical market problem at once. Can they afford to reinvent their purpose until, they have made their mark? Because they are definitely moving towards scalability, towards profitability, and that might, call for really reinventing their purpose as they go along. In that time, should they keep quiet or be transparent about how they are reinventing purpose until they finally hit the mark?
I think even from the study, what was interesting to me was 60% of respondents felt that it was important for brands to be committed to a single cause and to invest behind that for several years, and to not be kind of spreading yourself thin. So I think also choosing maybe one thing that is important and that can enable the business to today attract investment, and also something which resonates. I think authenticity is very important. It needs to resonate with the people in the organization, and it needs to resonate with your ability to be able to do something about it. So I think maybe internalizing, I don't have the answer, but maybe internalizing on that and thinking about something that would resonate both with employees as well as outside customers and investors could potentially place companies in a much better footing, especially startups that are maybe looking for capital. Today, investors have very clear investment guidelines. A lot of firms will not invest if certain things are not followed. So I think maybe looking and internalizing and seeing what one could do to be authentic and going behind that, because that resonates clearly with.
Absolutely, I agree. And I know we're running short on time, but I'd love to have a chat with you separately on what startups can do, because there's a lot. There's a lot. Last question. We're in the midst of, and I'm going to move away a little bit from purpose, but we're in the midst of like 200 plus comms professionals here. And how important is communications to you as a leader and to your firm? You know, how important is public relations as a function to you?
So as I think mentioned earlier, I think it's very important. And I think maybe in the past we didn't give enough emphasis to it. So I think today it really is front and center, not to kind of just sort of tout what has been done or pat ourselves on the back, but I think more in terms of, you know, information sharing, also in terms of, as you also mentioned in your report presentation, that, you know, what is the outcome at the end of the day? What is the tangible benefit that people are going to get from this, and why is it important? But I think today we can't escape from it, and I think it's important to fill the holes rather than let them be empty.
I'm sure everybody will be glad to hear that. We all have jobs. Well done. Anyways, Nyrika, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming here and being part of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much.